Hello, I'm Vinita Shetty, founder of The Smart Citizen, and I'm back with the second edition of the Smart Citizen Conversations on Place Branding and Identity. Place branding, place promotion, place marketing, diplomacy, these are distinct practices often confused with each other, and one of the objectives of this webinar is to understand the differences between them. We will also gain an understanding of and probe the implications of place brand management. Barcelona and Oslo are compelling place brands. And in discovering the making of these brands, we will drill down to the neighborhoods within cities and then zoom out to the relationship between region and cities. So some cities dominate the mindscape with their fame. Paris is a good example, but no one can name a neighborhood in their boundaries. Then there are some incredibly famous neighborhoods that define cities. So one of the intriguing issues we will be examining is whether neighborhoods are ingredient brands of the city or cities umbrella brands for neighborhoods. On the other hand, a country or region may have a strong brand that is beneficial for tourism, but a city which is seeking to evolve its own organizing principle may suffer from the dominance of that national brand. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the moderator of this conversation, Simon Paterson, founder of Barcelona-based Paterson Associates, who has spent the past 34 years creating, redefining, and strengthening brands around the world. His work spans a range of sectors, including hospitality, cities, airlines, energy, financial services, retail, media, technology, university, business, and design, education, and culture. His portfolio has included the recent rebranding of the Datai Langkawi, one of the world's most iconic hotels, NH Hoteles. He's also been involved in a recent placemaking project for the city of Shanghai and the Old Spitalfields Market in London. Simon is a member of the Medingay Group, a high-level international think tank on branding. Previously, he served on the advisory board of the Glasgow Collection, part of Glasgow 1999, UK City of Architecture and Design. He's worked for and with many of the world's leading brand and design consultancies, including Wolf Olins, Addison, and Pentagram. So let me hand over to you, Simon.
Hello, everyone. I'm looking forward to this second conversation about cities, regions, and place branding. And I'm going to start by introducing the first of our speakers, Juan Carlos Belloso, and then subsequently Martin Boisen. Juan Carlos is an international expert on the positioning, development, and promotion of places and destinations based in Barcelona. He helps places and destinations differentiate and become more attractive through strategic advice, insights, and innovative methodologies and tools. Juan Carlos has for many years been advisor to the City Council of Barcelona and other city organizations and institutions, and has also provided advisory services to many cities, regions, countries, and destinations, as well as other place-related organizations around the world, including Western and Eastern Europe, the US, Russia, Latin America, Northern Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Juan Carlos is a founding member of Barcelona Global, a private and non-profit association made up of many of the city's leading companies, research centers, entrepreneurs, professionals aiming to make Barcelona one of the world's best cities for talent and economic activity. He's also a member of the International Place Branding Association, a non-profit independent association of academics and professionals involved or interested in the principles and practices of brand development and brand management for places. He's a frequent speaker in different international seminars and forums, and he's an author of many articles and papers for different journals and magazines, and collaborates as visiting professor with different international universities and schools. Juan Carlos, welcome.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Since we are in Barcelona, we will be talking today about Barcelona. And I'm going to try to share with you a presentation where I would introduce some of the concepts that we can later reflect on the story about Barcelona, which is, of course, it's a long story. I will try to make it shorter and clear. Let me see if I can change the presentation. Sorry, share the presentation. Okay.
Yep.
I hope it's okay. Good. Okay, now let me see if I can. Okay. Let me just, sorry. Okay. So as Benita was introducing, we are talking about this idea concepts around brand, place brands, place branding, place promotion, which is always a confusing concept because it comes from the commercial sector. And so many people sometimes confuse what is the brand of a place. They may think it's about the logo or an image. This is what I would define a brand of a place. And I always think that when we think about the brand, think about mental representations, associations, something we associate a certain place with, being a country, a region, an urban area, neighborhood, as Benita was saying, there are very strong neighborhood brands around the world, or a destination, tourist destinations. And of course, this can be positive. I will always say that Barcelona has a very positive image, which is very helpful. It can be negative, sometimes because of stereotypes or because of some issues that happens in a certain place, or many times we don't know anything about the place. So our image of a certain place maybe doesn't exist. That's what we have to face when we work on reputation or image of a certain place. That's the brand. What is it, place branding? We talk place branding. Branding for me, I would say is art and science, but in fact reflects what we do to build and manage the image and reputation of a place as a whole. We will distinguish later when we build a tourist brand, a talent brand, an investment brand. But when we talk about the brand of a place, it's this idea around the place as a whole, okay? Why it's important? We always say that, oh, we're building a brand for the city. Why it's important? This is just a relation of some of the things we compete with, being a city, a region, and a country. We want to attract and retain our residents. We want tourists, professional visitors. We want talented people. That's the best, the most important word we are facing now, how to retain talent, to bring talent to places. We want investors, entrepreneurs. We want clients for our products and services. When we export a product from a certain place, we complete with other products coming from other places. But also we want to attract events, we want to attract international organizations, etc., etc. Okay, and I say why it's important, the brand, or as we say, brand image or reputation. It's important because as people or companies, we depend on our good name, our reputation, because it has a direct impact on our attitude, our predisposition, or behavior towards people, products, and services, whatever comes from a place. Depending on where it comes from, we are more willing to engage, we're more willing to buy something, we're willing to work with someone. When I say, where do you come from? People ask me, I say, from Barcelona. That creates a wow effect. People say, oh, wow, that's, I would say, it's a positive one, no? Sometimes you say you're coming from a certain place. I won't say any place exactly, but, and that may create a negative effect, that it takes a lot of effort to people convince that you are, in spite of coming from that place, you are a good professional, for example. No? So I think that's very important to have a good reputation. And it's, as we say, it's a key factor in attracting visitors, companies, investors, professionals, etc. So I would say it's not about image per se, or it's not about, it's a competitive tool. I think it's one of the best competitive advantages a places can have. So for me, that's what it's about, place branding. How do we work branding a place? Is by creating a shared vision. Sorry. Creating a shared vision of the place and working together, all the stakeholders, being private and public, designing and implementing all the set of strategies, ideas, projects, investment, and also communications over time. That's the way we build or change the perception or image of a place, which means it takes time and it needs a joint effort, including the citizens, that we will talk later about. Okay. Let me go ahead. So traditionally, when we talk about place branding, there are some specific objectives we want to do, or we do when we work on the brand. First, the best thing we need to do is to increase the awareness and knowledge of a place. Many projects we've been working, probably all of us, we face that people don't know about our place. So we want to create awareness and knowledge that we exist. The second is we want to identify what is our unique identity, what defines our place. Then we may want the branding to position and differentiate the place in relation to other places we are, let's say, competing or sometimes collaborating with. No? And place branding also helps us to set the future vision and set the direction of the place based on this unique DNA. Also can create a sense of identity and belonging among people that live in a certain place. The place branding can bring all the stakeholders together around this common vision and purpose. And then finally, I would say it can help us promote and sell. Although promoting and selling the place, that's what I would call place marketing. And maybe, I don't know, marketing or we'll talk later. But it's a big difference. One thing is about building the image, the reputation. The other thing is promoting, selling a specific assets, offer or position from the place. No? Let's go with Barcelona because I don't think we have probably too much time, but we'll see the differences through this story I can explain about Barcelona. Maybe Barcelona, for probably everybody knows, but it's not a really large city. It's 1.6 million inhabitants, although the metropolitan area is 4.8. 100 more or less, 100 square kilometers, 5 of them kilometers of beaches. It's the second Spain largest city in terms of population. It's the capital of Catalonia, which is of course one of the main economic engines of Spain, and the second, I would say the main export area. It's a very industrial, very industrial area traditionally, and it's a city with more than 2,000 years of history and cultural heritage. So we've gone through a long history. Probably most of people would think about Barcelona as an advanced, inspiring, cosmopolitan city, open, modern, creative. Creativity is something that is associated with our city, innovative, vibrant, diverse, and very human. Because I will say that Barcelona is a city with a human dimension in every sense. Okay, but if you look at rankings, I won't go in detail, we are very well positioned in most of the rankings around the world. Just to understand very rapidly, I would say from 87, let's say after dictatorship of Franco to the Olympic Games, then from the Olympic Games to what happened today, and then let's review a little bit what happens with the future, and especially these days when we have this COVID situation. Very briefly, people always talk about Barcelona at the Olympics. Of course, the Olympics were really a key, they have a key role for Barcelona, and I would say that there were like 3 main learnings from the Olympics, because it marked a before and after, a turning point of the transformation of the city. We will go on that, but I think the Olympics, as many events in places, they need to be used as a catalyst, in this case for transformation, but also for promotion. The other thing is that the resources that were generated and the energy acted also as a catalyst for the city. Not being a capital of a state, you have to be more creative sometimes, and you have to generate resources, expecting not coming from the main government, but through events or through other initiatives. And the third thing, I think the Olympics were like a great shop window for the city. We were allowed to show the redesigned city, our identity, but also how we were able to organize successfully an event of such magnitude. It was also about managing something which was complex. And if you think that was when I was young, we never expect to get the Olympic Games in Barcelona. Barcelona was not on the map. Why should we get something like the Olympics? So we were able to prove that it was the right decision and they were very well organized. Just to understand placemaking, that's another thing we are discussing usually when we talk about place branding. Transformation of Barcelona was already in place. The Olympics were just a catalyst of transformation. I will go fast with some images. That was Barcelona in the 60s. You see the sea. There was where all the neighborhoods where people from immigrants from the rest of Spain came to work on the factories in the front line, in the front sea of Barcelona. Just look at that. Nothing to do with what's going on today. But so that was even the color. I would say after Franco times, Barcelona was gray. We need to add some color to the city. And I think the whole the Olympics and the willingness to transform and the need. Sometimes the crisis needs you to, brings you to the need to transform. Sometimes when you are okay, why do I need to change? In this case, we needed to change, we needed to engage the citizens, we need to make people proud of the place, and the Olympics were a good opportunity. So if you see all these images, I go fast, but that was the Barcelona. The first important and most important thing was bringing back Barcelona to the sea. We're Mediterranean, but we were not looking at the sea as a place to look at. We were bringing back to the sea. We opened the waterfront, and that was, you see, but that was before COVID, of course. But that's what Barcelona, the seafront became a good place for tourism, for locals. We'll talk about tourists later. And the whole image of the city was completely transformed with new infrastructures, the seafront, new roads connecting the whole city, the ring roads to make traffic was terrible in Barcelona, so we make it easier, telecommunications towers. So the Olympics really made a change on the city. And even there were some campaigns to help citizens improve their facades and their buildings. That's very fast what happened. After that, so I would say placemaking was very important, transformation of the city. There is no place branding without transforming the place, unless the place is transformed, and you need also to communicate. But in this case, it was about placemaking, transforming, but also engaging and communicating. And of course, after 1992, again, transformation came again, redesigning the city, reinventing the city all the time. As you will see, the new airport, new high-speed trains, the new terminal for cruise ships, etc. Also, in terms of the ability to bring professional events, Barcelona is one of the most important cities for professional events. So all the infrastructures came after the Olympics too. And the markets is a good example of how to engage citizens, how to make compact neighborhoods. So the whole transformation of the city with cultural centers, etc., probably is one of the keys of the place to be attractive. I would say without transforming, without creating attractive places, attractive offers, and for people, it's impossible to be attractive. So this is what has been happening until today, even preserving cultural heritage. That's the old hospital, São Paulo, and that has been preserved today. It's a cultural center, it's a place for innovation, etc., etc. The second main transformation, I know I'm a bit long, but that's the only way to understand Barcelona transformation. For me, the second major transformation is, and we will talk about the Poblenou area, because this was the area, it used to be called the Catalan Manchester, where all the industries, traditional industries in Barcelona were based. And there was a time that's the Catalan Manchester, that's the way it used to be Poblenou. For those that you live in Poblenou, I know Vinita and probably Simon are in Poblenou. But then from the 60s to the 90s, obsolescence, degradation, all the industries left the city. So what happened with this area, because it was another neighborhood, people was living there, but there was a lot of activity in the area and we were losing jobs in the city. What do we do with that? No? So there was a big debate at the end of 1998, at the end of the century. What do we do with this area? By preserving the concept of compact neighborhoods in the city. Barcelona is very compact in the sense that people live, work, study, go out in the same neighborhood. We don't have like an industrial area, leisure. So we try to make it compact so people can have everything in the same area. So bringing that concept to the Poblenou, or keeping this concept, the idea was how to bring the knowledge economy, because that was what's coming, not anymore the industrial, traditional, but the knowledge-based economy, the value-added services to the city. And that was the idea to bring in the place. It was a project 20 years from now, has been very successful. So the plan was transforming the whole area, preserving industrial heritage with abundant infrastructures, public spaces, new research activities, new public spaces. So it was like a laboratory for smart utilities and services for the city, but also to be offered to companies that would need this type of services, all the technological. We work in different clusters: energy, information and communication technologies, medical technologies, media, design. These are all already placed in this area. Although again, we have universities, technological centers, incubators, and neighbors. And that was aligned with the strategy for the whole region, Catalonia, having specific clusters around the region. Okay, so that's Poblenou today. Nothing, and probably this is probably one of the most visited places in the city because it has become kind of a reference when you want to transform industrial, post-industrial areas and bring new services, bring culture. I would say Poblenou today they call innovation, technological district, but it's also a new cultural district because many cultural initiatives are coming to the city, both made from locals, but also from international people. We even have smart tours to Poblenou. Try to go fast. Of course, we kept, so there was a second major transformation, but we kept doing a lot of events, sports events. Barcelona is a lot of sports events coming into the city, fashion, professional events on food and medical. The Mobile World Congress that came linked after the Poblenou transformation. We also thought that the world was going to be mobile and technology was going to be key. So bringing the Mobile World Congress to Barcelona was absolutely fundamental and a really success. We then created the Mobile World Capital as an initiative to create startups and initiatives around the mobile technologies, smart cities, smart technology, and even, I would say, cultural events related to technology like the Sonar Electronic Musical Festival is also very much related to new technologies, new cultural expressions, multidisciplinary. You know? Of course, the city created Barcelona Tourism during the Olympics as a DMO, one of the first DMOs, public-private DMOs in the city, the Economic and Promotion Agency of the city, Instituto Cultura to promote culture. So there was a whole new initiatives, entities to promote the city and to create new things for the city. The Barcelona Film Commission to bring film to the city, design, etc. And of course, related to specifically to brand in the sense of promotion, there has been many initiatives. It was Barcelona Inspira concept. Now it's Barcelona, always Barcelona. These are all initiatives to keep telling stories about the city. Sometimes it has been used as a logo. I don't think Barcelona needs a logo. I think Barcelona is a very well-known brand without the logo. But sometimes we use that as a way to bring new stories. Okay. And then private organizations, which I was one of the founders, which is a private sector to create initiatives to act sometimes as a lobby to make sure of the initiatives that come from the strategic plans that are put in place, which is, and I think that's the way that has been Barcelona brand, let's say, created. Of course, through the vision and leadership of political leaders. We had a political Maragall, but also political party that ran in the city for many years that creates some stability. Of course, civil society through the strategic metropolitan plan, through many initiatives. Barcelona is a very bottom-up city. I think there's a lot of civic initiatives that come in place. Of course, creativity, innovation, boldness. That's, I would say, three words that define always Barcelona in terms of whatever is on. It has to be creative, innovative, bold. And of course, we have something which is unique. It's about our DNA, which is the location, our climate, our language, history. We are Mediterranean, the architecture, modernism, etc. These are all things, of course, that make the city also unique, and we also use as our DNA for everything we do. It has to be Mediterranean, creative, cuisine, gastronomy, etc. And as I said, common vision, placemaking, promotion. These are three things that are always in place in Barcelona to transform and to make. And just to finish, however, I think the major challenges, we are still perceived as a very tourist destination. We are struggling to make city perceived as a place to do business in our own innovation hub. We are on our way. I think the mobile, as explained, the 22 district help on that. Even recent research says it's an attractive city, international known and admired. That's the last research on perception of Barcelona we did. We have our own DNA. This is perceived as this. A referent quality of life. People want to come to Barcelona because there is quality of life. But still, we are mainly seen as a tourist city. This is a real challenge. And tourism, over tourism before COVID, of course, that's a main challenge for Barcelona because it's congestion, public spaces. We citizens of Barcelona, sometimes we don't even go to certain areas because are absolutely packed with tourists. You see Gaudí Parkway is a negative impact on cultural heritage and preservation. Even sometimes you put a fee on certain places, but they still keep crowded. Gentrification, people cannot live in certain areas of the city. That's one of the challenges we face, mainly due through this over-tourism. And even sometimes you see no tourists go away. So people get angry in certain areas, Barceloneta, in the Gothic area. And I think we always need to build new brand stories, no? Make the city more attractive for talent, make it more sustainable. And now I have some of the challenges. I won't go through that, we can go later. But I think, of course, COVID has made the opportunity, I would say, for places to think about what's their model. Does tourism, the way it is sustainable? How can we make it sustainable? Can we do it? Because the trend is to make things as it used to be in the past as soon as possible. Sometimes we should think about, it's a way to think what's the future, what are the challenges, how the public spaces or how the use of smart technologies, how jobs are going to change in the city, because now you can work remotely. Many people may come to Barcelona or places to work because they don't have to travel to the office just maybe 1 or 2 days. What are the opportunities? How can we attract investment again? And there is a new initiative in Barcelona. It's Barcelona Partners to attract investment. So I think the whole COVID has put challenges for cities, cultural production and consumption. We cannot go to certain places for culture, at least now. How can we change that? So I think these are, but I will finish with that. I like this phrase from Socrates, no? The way to gain a good reputation is to endeavor to be what you desire to appear. I think the only way to create a strong positive brand is by changing the place, making it attractive for foreign people, but also for the citizens, which are the main ambassadors. And I think it's to deserving this reputation by doing things. And I think Martin have always we have been worked together a lot in terms of I think places is about place, it's about people, it's not about logos. No? Okay, that's my presentation. I think we will have time maybe to discuss later a little bit. Let me just close the presentation.
Juan Carlos, thank you very much. I think that was fascinating and a good opportunity for us to ponder on both the challenges and the opportunities in the future. And particularly, I think, an opportune moment for Martin to come and talk to us about place brand management, because it's clear from what you say that inevitably there are competing interests in any city. And you talked about the fact that Barcelona has obviously suffered in its perception and reality of being dominated by its reputation as a place for tourists, but it clearly needs to evolve from that. And I imagine the competing interests are one of the major challenges of place brand management. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Martin to talk to us a little bit about the concept of place brand management, and then how to make it work in reality. And then perhaps we can come together and have a conversation about that. I mean, just a few words about Martin. A couple of seconds. Martin is a geographer who specializes in the marketing and branding of cities and regions as an integral part of urban and regional governance and planning. Martin's the owner of the advisory firm For the Love of Place, and he's the co-founding vice chairman of the International Place Branding Association, which Juan Carlos, you're a member of too. Martin lives in the Netherlands, from where he's been involved in more than 100 advisory projects. His clients include cities like The Hague, Oslo, York and Ghent, and regions like Amsterdam Metropolitan Region, the province of Northern Brabant, Verue and the Wadden area. He contributes as a panel expert to the Place Brand Observer. He's a chief advisor to European Cities Marketing and has been involved in knowledge development throughout URBACT, Interreg, and UNWTO. He is also a lecturer in human geography and planning at the University of Groningen, and he's published a number of influential research articles and book chapters on the topic. So welcome, Martin, and we look forward to the topic of place brand management and also the example of Oslo as a model. So over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Simon, and thank you, Juan Carlos, for the presentation. I'll just skip through the credential slides because you already said that in the introduction, Simon. Thank you for that. Building on what Juan Carlos already shared with us, I'd like to just briefly stipulate a couple of things. When we look at place marketing, place branding, place promotion, place development, all these different contexts and concepts, a lot of times they're used interchangeably. They're used as synonymous to each other, while in fact they're actually not. And there are many different ways in trying to define their differences or reconceptualize them. There's a lot of those in the literature. I've done a couple of attempts myself. But from an advisory perspective, when we're dealing with politicians and decision makers, we need to be brief and we need to be very, very clear. So what I've done here is basically put the four most important concepts that are intertwining in what we're doing, and then what we're trying to influence with them, right? So starting off very simply, place promotion is about influencing demand. It's very simple, right? You can do that through various efforts and so on. But place promotion is basically not that much about the supply. It has a certain supply in a city and it is tasked with bringing awareness of that supply and the propositions to potential users of that supply. So just in that, you'll see that place promotion is much more limited than place marketing, and it's an obvious part of place marketing. Place development, on the other hand, when we build new cities, when we build hotels, when we develop events, when we reconstruct brownfield developments, such as Juan Carlos's example, we're changing the actual supply of the city, not just buildings, but also services, atmosphere, possibly even culture, how it feels to be there, right? Through nowadays oftentimes called place-making approaches, but not limited to that. Everything we do in the city influences the supply of that city. And the most simple version of saying what place marketing is about is to say, just like normal marketing is not just advertisement and promotion and stuff like that, place marketing is about influencing the choice. So influencing spatial choices. And the choice happens when supply and demand meets. So if you want to be strategic about place marketing, you need to have the people thinking about place marketing being able to influence both supply and demand, right? So we don't want to have a situation where marketing is only about creating awareness and going outwards. It's also about reorganizing the way in which the city works to better serve the needs of different users. And mind you, I'm not just saying this as it is a cliche, but I really believe this. The most important users of any city are the ones that are already there. And you can approach place marketing and the choices of the people that are already there in your city with the same scrutiny and the same level of strategic and monetary efforts as trying to attract others from outside. But oftentimes it's a little less popular to talk about place marketing in the internal dimension. Just one example of what this kind of thinking means. If you consider the efforts necessary to attract one tourist to your city, what that costs in effort, not only money, but also time, versus what it would cost to have, 10 of your own citizens visit a museum more often or going out to the restaurant once more every year, you can actually make pretty simple economic models about at what extent the influential of these behavioral choices should be focused on your own population first and not necessarily on the people coming from outside, right? Not as a false binary, you don't have to choose, but if you had to choose, at least that'll help you set some basic priorities. So that's basically place marketing. Now what place branding is about, and I agree profoundly with Juan Carlos's explanation there, and his initial definitions. What we're trying with place branding is basically to influence the image of a place. And by influencing the image of the place, we hope to do some kind of reputation management over a longer time frame. Now, to influence the image of a place, as Juan Carlos has also pointed out, we also need to influence the supply and the demand. But we're not influencing that necessarily because we want the choice in this case. We're influencing it because we want people to have other associations, other attitudes, and other feelings connected to our place. And we have this basic assumption, which often goes untested, I have to say, that the image and the choice are almost sort of like automatically interrelated, right? That a positive image leads to a positive choice, or vice versa, right? That, in other words, negatively formulated, if there's not enough people visiting your city, it's probably because they either do not know that you exist or that you do not have a positive enough image for that certain market. And I disagree basically with that basic assumption. It's a little bit of chicken and an egg thing. They co-influence each other all the time. But one of the lessons we can draw from Juan Carlos's example is that if you have to be strategic about this, at least start by the supply. Right? Start by the building of the city, because even if you're unsuccessful in attracting others to that area, at least you've made a nice piece of city. So that's a way of looking at these things. This was also the vantage point for our discussions when we got hired in Oslo. I think about 6 years ago now for the first time. And what we were dealing with in Oslo was basically to try to get people to understand that place marketing and place branding was not the same thing, but on a political level. And that political level was not just one city, as I will show you in a bit. And one of the ways we did this was to say, like, well, let's look at the organizations in the city that are already responsible for certain market influences, right? So let's look at the place marketing side and let's see which kind of public-private partnerships or which part of different municipal or regional authorities are actually engaged in, pushing Oslo or parts of Oslo into certain markets. And then you see this task of place marketing, balancing supply and demand, playing out to gain foreign direct investments, destination management, oftentimes in the light of tourism, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but unfortunately only light of tourism and not a broader aspect. General business development, so an internal practice. Tourism promotion as such on various scalar levels for city trips internationally, but also to have people from a wider region come in and use the retail in the city and stuff like that. Talent attraction, incredibly important for diversification of the economy, and a broader definition of events, where, in my view of events, almost everything that is sort of temporary can be viewed as an event. So not only the classical MICE definition that is in here. Now, all very well, nothing new, no rocket science. Interesting is that for each and every one of these markets, you could say, there are different organizations operating on different mandates from different stakeholders. Some of them have a lot of public funding and political influence, and some of them have none. Oftentimes there are more organizations that overlap in terms of their responsibilities and so on and so forth. But paramount, and this is not chiefly the case for Oslo, but even more so for even more cities, including Barcelona to a certain extent. Between Barcelona Tourism and Barcelona Global, there is sometimes quite a lot of space in terms of what they want to achieve. And this is a inherent thing that goes into Simon's question about balancing out different priorities and interests. But the interesting part here is that if you imagine theoretically that they would all these organizations would all tell a story about Oslo or Barcelona or whatever city that would fit the most in the markets that they try to be successful in, then the chances that the sum of all that storytelling is not going to be a coherent story, because they will highlight certain aspects which they believe to be effective to try to attract businesses, and they're going to highlight other aspects which they believe to be effective to sell, a low-cost carrier flights to the nearest airport and a city trip weekend, right? Mass tourism, for example. And that might coincide with each other, because as people, and not necessarily as consumers, but as people, when we're talking about geographical brands, we do not discern that much. There are different contexts in which we can view them, but I think Vinita mentioned Paris. The thing that pops into your mind when we talk about Paris, that's basically the brand. And if that is overly formed by tourism, then other sectors might actually have a problem with the fact that Paris or Barcelona has a very strong touristy related brand. And it might be difficult to associate that city with something else. As a side note, across the Mediterranean, Barcelona might be one of the only cities that have at least partly succeeded in not being associated only as a tourism destination. And that is largely due to Barcelona Global, if you ask me, and the steps that went before that. So that's all very well. But if we do not want to have a different story about a city presented to people, and we want to have some kind of congruence, we want to have some kind of coherence, not only to be more effective in the markets, because these stories might interfere with each other, but also because they reflect back at our own population. Right? When you tell a story about your city to the world, most of the people that will hear that story are the people already in your city. Right? So that might not be your chief target, but it is definitely going to be your chief audience, whether you like that or not. And that is something to take very much into account. Sometimes you can do something that might be highly ineffective in reaching people abroad, but it will be very effective in reaching and pleasing the people inside the city themselves. Right? It's a little bit like us as persons. Right? If I hear somebody else tell a story about me, I'm listening very carefully, and that's shaping and potentially damaging my self-awareness and how I view myself. And it might be much more impactful on me, how other people present me, than it is on other people, how you present me to them, right? So this also goes with the more collective imaginations and collective perceptions of communities within cities, and this even more imagined community of a city is in its own right. So what does that leave us for place branding? Well, as we mentioned, both of us, place branding is basically reputation management, which is why I like to talk about place brand management, because that's a task. That is something that somebody needs to be doing. If you don't do place brand management, place branding still happens, because places basically brands themselves. And they've been doing that for thousands of years, if they've existed that long, which also shows that you can never start to design the brand of a place. You can never start to define the place of a brand, or sorry, the brand of a place, if you do not actually start asking and start digging into the associations that people already have with that place. Now, the chief task here is not to, like the place marketing side of events, to for example, obtain foreign direct investment. No, the chief task of reputation management is to make sure that everything that happens here on the left side of the slide, that actually is on brand. And that everything we do, not only everything we tell and communicate, but that everything we do to please these areas is on brand, right? So for a city like Oslo that pleases itself as being a very egalitarian, very equal society, for example, having very, very beneficial tax deals and tax rebates to gain foreign direct investment might be very efficient, right? In terms of creating the transaction there, but it might actually be in contrast to the values that the city of Oslo prides itself to stand for, and therefore it might be even more damaging to the general population's feeling about something like that in Oslo, as in any city in a more Anglo-Saxon society, where they see this as a, part of the game oftentimes. So we want both the behavior of the city, the place development, and the communication of the city to be on brand. And then we only need one more ingredient, and that is to realize that everything that happens in the place communicates, whether it's designed to communicate or not, right? So the place on brand communication is not just campaigns and stuff like that, but it's basically everything: street furniture, how fast are people walking on the street, and stuff like that. For the people that want to dig further into this, Mihalis Kavaratsis has written quite some interesting articles on this perspective. Maybe we can put up some links afterwards. Now, all of this you can put in this very complex model. And you don't need to be able to read the whole model. It's actually a tabletop model, which you're supposed to be able to turn around and discuss. But basically what you see is here in the middle, place brand management, oftentimes as the missing piece of the puzzle, the missing gravity point of all of these different markets that we operate with. On the top, you see present businesses, potential businesses, investments, all these different target markets of place marketing. You see towards the center, you see the more product market combinations, if you like, the business climate as such, not only the physical stuff, but also how people approach each other, how the public services are, whether entrepreneurs are connecting to each other, whether you're rewarded for being entrepreneurial or not, the general quality of life of living in that place, not as a benchmark created by one or other consultancy company that wants to sell advice on how to climb higher up in the ranking, but whether the population itself actually feels that it has a high quality of life, right? Because the Danish population might have another idea about what a high quality of life means and what it should entail that another population, let's say the population of Barcelona. Although in this case, I think the Danes want what Barcelona has, and a lot of the people from Barcelona want what the Danes have, right? So the grass is always greener. So that's probably also why there are so many cheap low carrier flights going back and forth between Barcelona and Copenhagen. So that said, the underneath part of this model is basically the internal dimensions of relationships, the public diplomacy. I think Juan Carlos also mentioned that one of the outcomes of place branding and a positive reputation is also that you can have political alliances, right? So not necessarily gain anything in terms of conversion, in terms of money, or in terms of direct behavior, but attitude is not just the general population, but it's also other politicians. So you might to team up. So kind of like a new Hanseatic League, but then without the warships. Now, approaching all of this to Oslo, we see that Oslo came from a very interesting place. First of all, they had not really been engaging in place marketing or place branding exercises before we were there. They had tourist promotion, business promotion and stuff like that, but not really taken the step to actually having a more broader and a holistic approach to place marketing. So we did not only have to go in with place brand management, we also first had to go in and claim why it would make sense to have a more holistic approach to the marketing aspects, right? So we had to skip a couple of steps. At the same time, Oslo was not just the city of Oslo, but 78 municipalities with their own mayors, with their own political hinterlands and so on and so forth, and 5 regions. And Norwegians, there are not that many of them. I say as a Dane, there are not that many Danes as well. But 2.1 million inhabitants live in the area that was part of this Oslo assignment in various political constituencies. Oslo was and is one of the fastest growing capitals in Europe. It's perceived to be far away, up north, and a lot of people know a lot about Norway, but very, very little about Oslo. So one of the reasons that we were given in our brief for actually having this project, there was, the diversification from oil to other things. There was a lot of more economic reasons, but there was one reason that was purely perceptual, and that was that Oslo wanted to contrast itself from the dominant image of Norway. Norway being a pretty strong nation brand in the sense that most of the world's population will have almost the same associations if you ask what is Norway, and most of that will be about nature, possibly a little bit about Vikings plundering stuff, but then also Vikings plundering stuff in the beautiful natural setting, right? And Oslo being a forward city, trying to be a young, modern capital, like every other capital in Europe, by the way, they were actually having problem with the fact that most people only knew Oslo as the capital of Norway, and then immediately the associations that people had with Norway, predominated by tourism promotion over a long constituent time. It's a little bit like the Mediterranean cities I just mentioned, that the associations of Norway were immediately copied towards Oslo, right? There was not really room in the minds of people for any other story. So they needed to, without going in opposition to Norway, because it's a positive, natural brand, they needed to contrast themselves and attach themselves to it at the same time. And that was a quite difficult achievement. At the same time, as I just mentioned, you had a lot of different organizations here. And you see here 78 municipalities, 5 regions, and so on. These different organizations tasked with different aspects of the place marketing when we came in, they did not have the same geographical hinterland. So not only did they not have the same kind of stakeholders, right? The DMO, the Tourism Promotion Board, having, of course, a lot of, what we call papa and mama companies. So small companies, family companies, but also big hotel chains. But also business region was also, big oil companies, big startups, banking, financing, real estate. But they were also not organized spatially in the same bubble, right? Let alone the municipalities. So what we basically had to do is we had to take a stakeholder analysis that a specialized company had done, including 1,600 different organizations and companies and so on, that in one way or the other was using Oslo as part of their story, their own story. And we were asserting that if we could get these different organizations to tell more or less the same story, at least more or less the same core message before they came with their specific propositions. And if we could build in some kind of test or tool to make sure that they would not do something in their propositions or in their behavior that would be, so to speak, off-brand, then we could basically have this introduced without having to create a new organization, not to have an organization like the brand police with one brand manager to rule them all, but to have more of like a common foundation or underlayment and people in charge of monitoring how this image and reputation of Oslo was being influenced by checking to what extent they communicated on or off brand. And you see here on the screen, you see Visit Oslo, the traditional DMO, tourism, cultural sector, MICE. You see Oslo Business Region, FDI, expats, right? Serving the expats while they're there. The startup scene of Oslo itself, connecting that to angel investments all over the world. Real estate development, right? I said the city was growing a lot and they wanted the growth of the city to be Oslo, right? They didn't want it to be another kind of generic urban development. They wanted also to test the new development of the city, that would still be Oslo when it had grown, so to speak. Oslo Regional Alliance, which was the political cooperation in charge of regional planning, very important when we say we want to influence the behavior, and in charge of international positioning, which is interesting because the whole reason we were allowed to do this was because they formulated the task to position Oslo internationally, with the idea that they would then be able to tell their own stories and compete with each other on a national level, but that we would first be able to get their positioning internationally. This has changed. They have understood that they are more to be as one in their behavior as well as in their communication. And next to these chief organizations, of course, the large network of the other PPPs, so the public-private partnerships, such people, not to forget. Here I don't mean the general population, but people that were very outspoken, so self-asserted ambassadors in Juan Carlos's terminology, and certain companies. And when you have these stakeholders to commit themselves to act on brand, and you can facilitate them and advise them in what that then means, then the collective output of that is always going to be much more effective. It's going to have much more support amongst the different interest holders and stakeholders than when you would pertain to organize this from one singular organization that would then basically have to yell so hard and so continuously to sort of like outblow all the other messages that are told about Oslo from all the existing organizations. Now, one of the ways in which we sort of like happenstance to this was to basically take some tools from corporate branding and try to, I would say, transpose them or translate them into this the setting of this complex governance that I just told you about. I mean, remember, nobody has the rule to say, oh, this is the way it's going to be. Nobody owns the brand of a city. So it needs to be more loose, more bottom-up, more flexible, and more facilitating than in corporate branding normally is the case. right? Not only because of the ownership, but also because you don't really want to say no to people that want to tell a story about your city. You want to help them to tell it in a better way. If you start saying no from this binary off-brand, on-brand matrix, if you don't know how to make it into an extensive scale, then you basically start pushing people away from you. So what was done was that through a large consultation with companies and people and audiences and also residents, remember a lot of companies and such are also residents, right? So, but also general residents. A couple of values was identified, not necessarily to be, this is the identity of Oslo or something like that, but to say, well, these are values that we can see in our history. There are values that we live by now, and they are, most importantly, values that we aspire to live by in the future. Pioneering, enriching, and real, whereas enriching should not be about money, but about a more enriching society and community. The goal to be the world's favorite compact city is, you know, you gotta have ambition somewhere. But this idea of the compact city is really in this idea of although the city is growing, it still wants to be a city on a human scale, you can say. And the idea was that if you take these values as guiding principles and you start testing initiatives towards these values and asking yourself in an awareness exercise, not just to formulate the branding strategy, but as a continuous process, whenever there's a new development, both in planning and in evaluation of both the city development, events, tourism promotion, you name it, all the stuff that we just talked about. If you build in the governance and the decision making that people in charge of projects or proposing projects are being held accountable towards this on their own account, that they are themselves asked to explain to others how that what they intend to be doing actually represents these values, then you have a starting point for a good conversation, and you have a moment in time, possibly even more moments in time before decisions have actually been taken to try to shape those decisions to have a better outcome. And when you have this kind of conversation from a basis like this, then oftentimes you also see that you can actually have more initiatives that could strengthen each other if they would just change their stories quite a little bit, or even more practically, maybe tell these stories or have these initiatives at a slightly different time and place. The idea was that if you use these and if you pertain to have these principles, then at the end, whatever you would put through this filter that you see here on the screen would become towards 100% Oslo. And from that, and I'm going to speed up through these, from that, a lot of different elements were put through this filter, so to speak, right? These are the X Games, which Oslo organized instead of the Winter Olympics. And the X Games has a much larger brand fit to Oslo, as defined in those values that you just saw, than the Winter Olympics would have. Especially because at that point, the IOC was also seen as pretty corrupt and under a lot of fire. That is, again, contrary to the core values that Oslo had set for itself to then align itself with an international organization that basically would oppose the values of the city. It's a pretty interesting way. And this young pioneering thing was also completely in the X Game thing. It's still a mass communication event, but through the channels of the individual athletes themselves towards their own markets. So basically a complete fit, not only with the brand, but also with a lot of the talent and expat and education markets that Oslo wanted to dip into. Get them while they're young, right? And it went into everything, went into the different business events, embassies, expos, trade embassies going all over the world, the Oslo Permanent Expo at South by Southwest in Houston, the Oslo designations to the angel investment in Tel Aviv, and all these different things, basically told more or less the same story in their own version, in their own language, and also importantly, in their own visual identity. That wasn't our concern, but the moment you're talking about Oslo, that's our concern. Which color you're using, we don't care, because Oslo is the brand and Oslo is the thing that we want to manage the reputation of. So Various examples: real estate, MIPIM investments. We saw that the real estate investors started creating a unified story about the growth of Oslo. So when they went to present themselves to international investors, they would basically do our work and tell the story about Oslo and why Oslo was such a special place. All they needed was facilitation. And the most important thing, of course, was that all of this happening resonated with citizens, so that citizens actually became more proud, not necessarily on the place brand strategy, which they, if everything went well, had not really heard about if they weren't directly consulted, but a lot of the positive vibe that started happening, and a lot of the international news media and lifestyle magazines that started talking positively about that interesting, inspiring city up north that we'd all forgotten about. And that is a really, really nice takeaway. The pride of the citizens, not to make them ambassadors to go out and tell the story, but as the end goal, as more or less the key KPI, right? If they start becoming more proud and more satisfied about the city, then everything is going well. Now, summing up, this project won the Place Brand of the Year award at City Nation Place. And it was kind of funny because at that point it hadn't really been implemented yet. So basically we won because of the strategy document that you see down on the left there, the green one, the Oslo Region Brand Management Strategy. And the funny thing is, you can see the slide here. You can see here they had to put a logo up there, right? So when Oslo had won, they were desperately trying to make this PowerPoint slide, and they were asking which logo should we put up there, because with all the other contestants there would have been a logo, because the logo would have been the chief ingredient, and part of the story of Oslo was we do not have a logo. Oslo is the brand, but they still had to put a logo up there, and of course they put up the logo of one of the partners, which you can imagine back home. Did some of the other partners think like, hey, wait a minute, Oslo Business Region did not win Place Brand of the Year, Oslo did. So, the less we talk about logos, the more we start believing that we can get rid of them, but they also come back with a vengeance. Now, the last thing that I want to show, and maybe this is something we can talk more about in a discussion setting, is that when you say this 100% Oslo, and when you have core values and themes that you want to express, it should never just be a yes, no. It should always be a to what extent does this thing reflect our values, right? With the idea is that you start on this axis, you start neutral with 0, and the more an event or a building or a campaign or whatever, everything can basically come in here, because everything communicates about the city, as long as you compare within the same category, right? All the events in the city, or all the campaigns, or all whatever. Then you could say the moment it expresses our core values in a way that people can also sort of like decipher that, the more on-brand it is. The more it actually contradicts our values, the more off-brand it is. And some projects can have contents that are on-brand and off-brand at the same time. And then, of course, the task of a place brand manager is to get rid of the off-brand content and reinforce the on-brand content. The other scale, low impact and high impact, is an assessment that is not through just in terms of media representation, right? The most simple one would be a mega event has a lot of international audience and a lot of participants, so that will automatically have a high impact, you could say. But small events can also have a high impact if they're very directed at a certain group of people. For example, the angel investors, there's not that many of them. When you have something targeted towards that, and you're really effective in that, you can actually have a quite high impact on this general perception. And the last one that I like, especially after Juan Carlos's presentation, is that some places in a city, some areas, some streets have a larger impact than others, simply because they are the visual entrances to the city, the waterfronts, the places where people are coming. They give you a sense of what that city is about. And what we are developing there should, at least strategically speaking, be more on brand than what we're developing elsewhere. So I think for now, that's in a rush what I wanted to share with you. After Oslo, we have taken this model much further in other cities like The Hague and so on and so forth. And it's really interesting to see now that a lot of cities are doing place brand management, that then they're using this simple tool on a day-to-day basis to have really interesting discussions about how something could be more on brand. And that's much better in my belief than a yes-no binary or a perfect place brand strategy that never really leaves the paper. All right.
Martin, thank you very much. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and really interesting, because it certainly from my perspective as a brand strategist, and feels like a very compelling story, very simple, very clear, and something that it's easy for people to get around. And it's very interesting, at the end of the day, you said they had to stick up a logo, because of course at some point, you know, symbols are really important, and you could argue that something along those lines could work, but of course it reflected one particular group. I mean, but I think the emotional impact of 100% Oslo as a message, it seems to work really well, and I imagine it resonated very well with people across a wide audience. I think my first question to you is, you know, this was, you won the City of the Award, you won this award based on a strategy document. How much of this is now happening? What are the major challenges? How well is this tool working or not? Maybe that would be a good place to start. And then Juan Carlos, I'd be very interested in your observations about what opportunities there are for Barcelona to learn from this kind of model, or what are the challenges? So Martin, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very relevant question. To be honest, as an advisor, I was not that happy that Oslo won that year. Because the approach, the strategy, the thinking, which was not only ours, right? It was a co-production with a lot of people from the institution that I've mentioned, including the people on the photo getting the award. But one of the problems that arose was that we did not build this new organization, right? We basically based the implementation of the strategy on existing organizational frameworks, because they already had funding and mandates and stuff like that. That's part of the brilliance of it and the elegance of it, but it's also a vulnerability, such as everything. When we talk about governance, has two sides. And the vulnerability was that the moment that some of these brilliant people got other jobs, then their personal investment of the replacement came into a situation where they might not have felt that they were as much a co-owner of the project as their predecessors were, because we weren't around, right? I'm still a member of the Oslo International Advisory Board, so we come back 3 times a year to talk on high-level strategic impact of this, but the day-to-day management is more important, if you ask me, right? So right now, in later years, I know that this is still relevant and it's still being used, but in my experience, it's mostly being used on the larger strategic things like Oslo Green Capital, like a European Green Capital events and stuff like that. But I would very much like to see it implemented again in all the smaller things, in all the smaller events, and especially in the things that Visit Oslo, the tourism DMO, is doing, because I'm seeing more and more things before Corona, obviously. I'm seeing more and more things coming out of them where I ask myself whether or not that has really been tested towards this metrics.
What about with citizens? I mean, you hinted that this was something that really worked and resonated with the people of Oslo, and it feels that it could and should and maybe reflect a real level of engagement and ownership and pride from the people of Oslo. Do you have a sense of the role they're playing, or have the opportunity to play, to continue to participate in evaluating whether what's happening in Oslo is indeed 100% Oslo, whether it really reflects the values or not?
But there are many different ways in which to engage with citizens in this sense. And basically you have the sneaky approach and you have the upfront citizen participation approach, and then everything in between. I think in Oslo, we kind of had the sneaky approach, because the moment that you talk about Oslo in general and you have a good dialogue about the city in general, which Oslo has as an egalitarian city, right? There's a lot of citizen participation and consultation with all the challenges that are in there. And they're talking about the future and the daily life and well-being of Oslo as such. And the brand there is not the chief concern, as it shouldn't be. right? So for us, we want to hear opinions about what the citizens think about their own city and what they resonate about it, but we do not need them to feel owners of the place brand management strategy in that sense. In other cities, it would be completely different because it would organize differently. And it's a difficult, it's basically a difficult situation. What we do in other cities when we get the chance, but I'm not running this in Oslo at the moment, but is that we have ongoing continuous workshops with small focus groups. And we will never be able to have a representative sample of the whole population of any city. But we're trying to sort of like reevaluate the brand values and the outcomes of the brand values by asking, citizens that are willing and able to spend an evening talking about these things to sort of like validate what the professionals have found of things. And that's a good way of making sure that it doesn't start, living its own life amongst the people that think they understand it. But the moment that you say that the brand is nothing else than the name of the city, then the engagement and the participation in discussions about the city as a whole are actually also indirectly discussions about the brand. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
I think sometimes as advisory firms really like to engage with citizens during the formulation of the strategy to make sure that that they know what they're doing, basically. And a lot of advisory firms fail, not for a lack of trying, but fail in having that kind of continuous citizenship participation being built into the way in which the place brand management works. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's often a one-off, unfortunately.
Juan Carlos, that'd be interesting, your reactions to Martin's talk on both the concept but also the mechanism, and whether you feel there's interesting lessons for Barcelona to learn from this. I mean,
yes, well, thank you, Martin. I think it's a great, very simple and very clear presentation about what we always talk about, concepts on place branding. And I think the Oslo example is very illustrative. I think it can be used in many places, although I would say that differs on the identity and the culture of each place. I don't think we can do exactly the same in Barcelona at all, because the culture is very different. We are not that, it's not that easy to get everyone on the same table to have the same vision. Maybe we have another specific problems in terms of, if we take Barcelona now, I think we face, apart from the objective of increase the position of the city for talent and investment. But I think in terms of the city, we are suffering from this mass tourism. I think many people is disconnected with the city. They are not that proud or engaged. So I think, probably Martin could confirm, but I think the starting point may be different and the culture may be different. And I think also with the Oslo, which is very, very interesting, because the focus is very much on the metropolitan or the region, which is something that in Barcelona we've been trying to do for I would say for decades, but it's very difficult. And there are always other problems which comes to political will, political interests, the interests of the different stakeholders. And I think this is sometimes, for me, the most challenging thing is how do you get everyone together with the same vision, ambition, and I think, of course, the model is, for me, it's very good. It's very simple. It helps to understand the difference between building the image, between, as he said, the demand, the supply. But again, you have to think about the place and the differences in each place. For example, for me, Barcelona, we're saying, I think the success of Barcelona for me is because the civil society is very strong and has always, most of the time, developed things which are on brand, I would say, without knowing they were on brand, which means I was talking about creativity, innovation, boldness, but also this idea of being open, progressive. We're a commercial city, we're on the sea. So I think many things came together in the same direction because there was something on our DNA. Yeah. Then I think the politicians, the organizations can support, can enhance that, bring them together and make sure other things go on brand. But without that, I don't think the city would be successful.
And again, just to interrupt, it suggests that the city, Barcelona, has a collective personality. Would you agree with that? And to that extent, do you think that's helpful in people understanding what differentiates Barcelona and what makes Barcelona Barcelona? And that equally, you could say that could be something you could apply to any city. If it was clear about its DNA and its values, and actually there was such a thing as a collective personality, it might encourage people to participate more?
Well, just to illustrate what I mean, for example, Barcelona, for example, if you think about the sports, most of the sports events in Barcelona are organized by sports clubs or sports. I mean, like for example, the tennis tournament is done in Club de Tenis Barcelona, which is a private club, long established and enhanced by local people. So I think the main church, Barcelona in Santa Maria del Mar, was made by the citizens with contributions from. So you have many examples of how people have been always engaged in making the city advance. I wouldn't say thinking about the brand, but making the city evolve, making a better place for people, and always with this idea of being commercial oriented, open to the world, innovative. Maybe we are not the most innovative, but we bring innovation and transform it in a creative way. So, and I think in this sense, I think what the city has to do is to enhance this spirit of creativity and entrepreneurship, and of course try to create a story which is consistent. No, but sometimes again you find also at the same time there are many organizations with their own interests, and how do you bring them together with the single vision and common vision? And then citizens, that's the other question, no? Because Martin explained very well, not thinking about citizens as ambassadors or storytellers, but if they're not happy with their place, if they're not proud, what kind of story you can play? And I think the challenge now in Barcelona, I think we face really a problem also with citizens being engaged with the model of city we have, to be honest, and to be transparent. I think this is a real challenge, is how citizens become, again, in love with the city, as we had with the Olympics. The Olympics were very successful because of that, because people got in love with the city.
Do you think you have an opportunity in a post-COVID environment? Do you think this is genuinely an opportunity as much as a challenge?
I think there are many issues. I think it could be an opportunity, but again, as we all see in many places, the pressure is to come back to normal as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. And then you have the let's say the tourism sector. You have a strong organization, hotels and many other, which need to fill again the hotels, to bring as many tourists. So it would be an ideal time to rethink about, to make it sustainable, to make it more balanced in a way for certain, but the pressures are very strong. So I don't know, I mean, everywhere I think it's the same debate, no? Can we use that crisis as an opportunity? But how can we do the transition? Because some people maybe lose what they have and they have to transform their models. I don't know, I mean, I don't have the answer, but I think that's the challenge now.
Martin, would you like to make any observations on the challenges for a city like Oslo and others you've worked with in the current environment in terms of COVID? I mean, is this fundamentally an opportunity as well as a challenge? So do you have specific observations on that?
Yeah, first I'll agree with Juan Carlos in general with the application of one size doesn't fit all, right? So I think the Oslo model, it's you know, the Oslo model is two things. One of them is the organizational framework, which you can never copy paste, and the other one is the application of this simple idea of testing core values towards a broader decision making in urban and regional governance. And I think the second part can be copied and pasted as an approach, and the first part cannot at all. So with that said, and that relates directly to the COVID situation, we have implemented this approach in 25 different spatial entities, so cities and regions. And what I see, and some of them we are working with right now, and what I see is the ones that were ready before COVID happened, they could also use their responses and test them towards the filter, so that they would communicate about these measures in a way that resonated with their core values and thus with their population. Although the measures were generic, they were able to do it in the tone of voice and with a core message and an emotional contextualization that made it more acceptable. And I don't know if it also means that people behave more in line with those messages. I don't know, but at least the resonance was there. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you know, the power, as Juan Carlos states, not only for Barcelona, of course, but also for some of our clients like Amsterdam. The pressure to getting back to normal, as Juan Carlos phrases, is immense, right? I'm also working for the European Cities Marketing, which has more than 130 of European tourism destination cities in their network. And we have been talking for 5 years about how we should reinvent tourism, how we should have progressive tourism tax, how we should make sure that the local economy starts benefiting more again from tourism spending like it used to, instead of nowadays where it's more an industrial complex. How citizens should be accepting their cities being used for tourism and so on and so forth. Sustainability, you name it. When this crisis broke out, there was a lot of talk about how we could, never waste a good crisis, and how we could use this to, and so on and so forth. But just like with the financial crisis, I'm quite cynical. This is only really going to change anything significantly in terms of the tourism sector if there is a second, third, fourth, fifth wave. So if getting back to normal is no longer an option, because I'm advising politicians to use this to, for example, instate a progressive tourism tax, but there's no way they're going to do that, because they're not. Some might, because they're very visionary and they want to risk their own office, but most of them won't, because they will not be the ones that did anything that could be explained as an obstacle for those suffering tourism-related businesses and jobs to get back to normal as soon as possible. So this gridlock shows the dependency on some economic sectors over others, but it's interlinked with perception. Because if we move away from the Mediterranean area, the tourism sector is not that important in most cities, but it's still seen as one of the chief priorities of getting back up and running. And I think this has everything to do with the general misconception of tourism as something that comes in from somewhere else, walk over the statistical and administrative border, and then is only a netto benefit on the balance because they spend money there, right? So bags of money walking around, and the cost side of that is almost never taken into the equation. And because of that, it's very easy to say, yeah, of course we should do that. Of course, that should be top priority. Let's keep the low-cost carrier airlines alive, because they are making sure that we have jobs for our students and all these things. And in essence, a lot of times it's simply not true. Right. When we look into Spain, of course, the dependence on tourism as a total is so immense that it is more understandable in that context. So not a very positive outlook, I'd say.
I can see that. And I also realized, I think we've probably taken a lot of your time. We've probably got to a point where maybe we should stop. But I think what's interesting at the end is you're suggesting in the longer term, no city should be dependent on one particular sector the idea of diversity is really important, and the idea I think that's come through is the importance of a city or a place being authentic and somehow resonating with its citizens. And I was really struck by the fact that actually, if you it costs you less to invest in the people who are already there, potentially to use more of the resources that the city offers. But listen, thank you both very much. I'm going to hand over to Vinita now. Perhaps you'd like to make some concluding remarks, but it's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was completely riveted by the discussion today. And if I could just point to a few things I liked, which you know, I would take away from this. Um, you know, Juan Carlos mentioned crisis, and also Martin echoed that when he said, "Never waste a good crisis." Crisis usually leads to transformation, and certainly did. You know, in the case of Barcelona, when the Olympics and the Olympics acted as a catalyst for transformation. And it was a complete transformation, so economic, social, cultural. And the things he drove home about Barcelona's recipe for success, you know, as an abiding brand, visionary leadership, and the courage of municipal leaders, involvement and participation of civil society, creativity, innovation, and boldness. I think that's a really important takeaway. What I also loved is the agreement between the two of you, Martin and Juan Carlos, when you said, when you quoted Socrates, and you say the way to gain a good reputation is to endeavor to be what you desire to appear. And that was echoed by Martin when he said that place branding was, you know, was not only about the communication, but the behavior as well. So everything we do and communicate should be, so it's not just a matter of expediency, but there should be consistent adherence to values. You know, the brand, the person, you know, the city actually becomes its brand. And that's what I sort of love that thought. And the distinctions were so beautifully laid out by both Juan Carlos and Martin. And what I came away with was branding influences image, place marketing influences choice, place promotion, demand, and place development supply. It's a very elegant and simple way to express that. I would say that the inclusive process that you described, Martin, of you know, determining the values, taking stakeholders and citizens to consideration, values to live by, values in history, values that we aspire to live by in the future, and the idea of holding different stakeholders to account in justifying their initiatives as to whether they would be on-brand or off-brand would actually lead to a much stronger and a continuous process, because branding and management of place brand is a continuous process, and you emphasize the continuity of that. But by holding different stakeholders who've contributed to the brand to justify their initiatives and use the tools that you described to you know, would actually have a better outcome and strengthen the process generally. And finally, I like the idea that the logo is unavoidable, and the discussion on COVID was also very indicative of the differences between cities, and especially as regarding tourism. You know, it remains to be seen whether the first wave will actually trigger a transformation in the way this tourism has been managed so far, which is unsustainable. But possibly it'll take a second, third, or fourth wave, and that's a very striking thought. So that's all I really, you know, those are the things that stood out for me. I really want to thank you both for sparing your time, for preparing so assiduously, and Simon for so, you know, engagingly bringing out some of the themes of the session, and we'll look forward to the next one, which will be actually focusing on down under, so New Zealand and Australia. And with that, I'd like to close the event. Thank you so much.